Joining us right now from Washington is Homeland Security Department spokesperson Dave Lapan. Dave, thanks very much for joining us this morning. Your reaction to what we've learned in the last 24 hours?
Well, what I'd say from a Homeland Security perspective is that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, along with the FBI, are the lead investigators in this case. Homeland Security is fully in support to provide any information sharing that we can. And as the sheriff has said, this is going to be a long but very detailed investigation. So I think that as days go by, you will find out more and more about what actually happened. But the Las Vegas Police Department has done a great job so far with support from the FBI to try to get at how this tragedy occurred.
Would you, I'm sorry to be so ignorant, they say that he clearly or may have likely had help. I'm not seeing what it is that necessarily tells them that. Yes, he had a lot of, guns in the suite, and yes, he'd put up cameras, but he also had a lot of time to bring in a lot of equipment. And I'm not clear about what made this so clearly something where you all think that he might have had an accomplice. If you could explain that a little bit, I would really appreciate it.
Well, again, I can't get into specific details of the investigation, but I can tell you generally, based on what I've heard, is that to undertake something of this magnitude suggests that one person alone couldn't do it. Again, I don't know if investigators have very specific information that leads them to that, but it certainly would be a reasonable conclusion to believe that, again, looking at the facts that we know so far, it would be extremely difficult for someone to carry this out on their own.
And when you say it couldn't be one person carrying it out, do you mean one person doing all the shooting, or do you mean one person doing all the preparation for the attack?
Well, again, without getting into details of the investigation, my sense is that it would be the idea that an individual preparing to carry out an event of this magnitude could possibly have had help, but I don't want to, suggest anything different.
Yeah, well, we know that it was one shooter, right? And we know that he had 47 guns and all of that ammunition. So getting past the hotel and getting all of that into his room, planning it all, cameras outside his door, I guess that's some of the things that your colleagues on the police side and the FBI last night were talking about in that press conference. I want to turn to Puerto Rico, where recovery efforts are facing a new threat. The island's Treasury Secretary is out saying that the government will shut down at the end of this month if Congress does not provide billions of dollars in emergency funds. Prices on Puerto Rico's bonds took a hit after the president suggested that the island's $73 billion in debt should be wiped away, though administration officials were quick to walk back those remarks. Listen to this, Dave.
We're going to work something out. We have to look at their whole debt structure. You know, they owe a lot of money to your friends on Wall Street, and we're going to have to wipe that out.
It doesn't mean that the federal government is going to be bailing out Puerto Rico's long-term debt situation, bailing out the bondholders. What I think you saw there was the president focusing on the reality that in order to sort of get its long-term fiscal operation back in order, Puerto Rico is going to have to figure out a way to restructure its debt, which is...
I mean, Dave, do you think the president's words should have been taken literally about Puerto Rico's debt? I mean, he did say you can say goodbye to it, so I guess he was suggesting there's going to be a restructuring.
Well, from my seat at Homeland Security, I can't comment on that element of it. But what I can tell you is that the administration has asked Congress for a supplemental for the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA. There's a request for $12.77 billion for the Disaster Relief Fund. And in addition, the administration is asking Congress that $16 billion of debt relief be provided to the National Flood Insurance Program, given not only the situation in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, but also the hurricanes that impacted Texas, Louisiana, and Florida.
Right. Don Peebles?
Yeah, the big challenge here, though, is going to be what's next. Once the area is stabilized, how do we look at rebuilding Puerto Rico? Because that's going to be the ultimate challenge. And also there's the U.S. Virgin Islands as well that's been decimated as well. So what's the thinking in terms of going forward after there's a stabilization because the infrastructure is destroyed and, most homes have been severely damaged. And so how does that get done from a logistics perspective, and any thought on the financial perspective?
Yeah, while, by the way, the Commonwealth's bankrupt government is burning through $1.6 billion that it had on hand since before Hurricane Maria. That's all they had on hand, $1.6 billion, Dave.
And huge debt.
Yeah, and again, from a federal government perspective, given all of these different hurricanes as well as wildfires and disasters that we're dealing with, the federal government is obligating about $200 million a day dealing with all of these, again, different disasters facing us.
The damage to the telecom system, the electricity grid, I mean, that's all going to cost money. And you think that people are going to leave and go elsewhere. You said Florida is going to be a beneficiary.
Yes, I do. And I think that's another issue in terms of Homeland Security, is how do we protect our nation with what's going to be a massive amount of immigration and relocation, because you've got families who have kids in school and there's no school taking place, no life taking place in terms of daily activity. So anyone who can leave is going to leave.
That's
and
such a
one
good
of the prime
point.
places is going to be South Florida because of the hospitability in terms of language and so on.
So what's the plan from Homeland Security's perspective, Dave?
So from Homeland Security, we are completely in support of the governor of Puerto Rico and the government. And so if they take decisions that look at relocation of individuals from the island, either for schooling or to relocate, that's something that we would work collaboratively with the governor of Puerto Rico to work out. But the other point, too, regarding immigration is, remember, both in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, we're talking about American citizens.
Right. Right, but certainly we are talking about American citizens for sure, but that's still an issue if they're flooding into Florida, South Florida, right?
Yes, and there are also going to be other areas within the Caribbean who are not U.S. citizens who are also going to be looking to come to the U.S. Because places like St. Martin, Anguilla, and others that will not get rebuilt for a long time.
I was just going to say, this is also going to have huge political implications for Florida, because anyone from Puerto Rico automatically can vote when they go to Florida. If you assume that they're going to vote more Democrat than Republican, with redistricting coming up, this is going to have big impact on the electoral map.
Why would you assume they're going to vote Democrat?
Because historically they vote like 65-35
Yes.
would be a conservative estimate of the difference in how they're going to register.
Yes, that could have you're right, that could and likely will have a big impact on the upcoming gubernatorial election in Florida and then the next presidential cycle race.
Right.
Wow, really interesting. Dave, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Dave Lapan joining us there.